This is the only dumpling recipe you'll ever need. Hey everyone, today we are going back in time to a really old recipe. This is one of the original recipes that we first published when our blog came out in 2013. We called it the only dumpling recipe you'll ever need. Now, the joke's a little bit on us because we have since published quite a few dumpling recipes, but this is sort of the granddaddy of all of those recipes. We've done chicken dumplings, we've done pork, we've done beef, we've done dumplings that have shrimp, we've done dumplings with various vegetables. We even have gluten-free dumplings. This is the original recipe, the first one that we ever published, and it's also the most flexible. So you can use different vegetables in here, you can change up the meat if you like, but this recipe kind of has that sort of like blueprint for you for if you're just like, hey, I have this like vegetable that I have on hand, I have this either chicken or pork, or maybe even beef. How do I make a dumpling? How do I season it? How do I wrap them? How do I cook them? This recipe has all of that information that you need. We have so many dumpling recipes that this year we put together a post that lists all of the different filling recipes that we have, and we will link that in the description box below. All right, let's talk components. Let's start with the wrappers. So we are using store-bought wrappers today. This is what we've always used. I mean, like from childhood, I always remember just buying the wrappers from the store. So there is no shame in not making your own wrappers. It's totally fine. We have here a couple of brands, Wonton Specialist and Twin Marquee. If you find that the brand specifies Shanghai style or Northern style, we recommend going with a Shanghai style wrapper. It is thinner, it's not as thick, they're easier to work with and easier to wrap. If you wanna make your own dumpling wrappers, more power to you. We have tons of recipes for that. So we have a standard homemade dumpling wrapper made with all-purpose or bread flour. We have a whole wheat dumpling wrapper if you are so inclined. We also have a gluten-free dumpling wrapper if you are celiac or somebody in your family cannot eat gluten. So now that the wrapper talk is out of the way, let's talk of filling. We grew up with a greener than average dumpling. My mom always liked to make dumplings that had more veggie in them, so it's almost like a 2-to-1 ratio of vegetable to meat. So we would use around 2 pounds of vegetables for every pound of meat. In this case, we are using baby bok choy. Baby bok choy is a much better choice than those really big bok choys that you can get at Western markets these days. You want more leaf than stem. Baby bok choy is a good candidate. Napa cabbage, if you cut out the sort of center rib of the cabbage. Shepherd's purse is another really delicious option. You can buy that frozen at your Asian market. This is a really flexible recipe. You could even use spinach. I've had friends who said that they use spinach. That's totally fine to use as well. There are also dumpling recipes that involve celery, garlic chive. The method for those recipes is going to be slightly different, so I would just direct you to that post of our dumpling filling recipes. Look for our pork and celery dumpling, look for our pork and chive dumpling. If you are going to use a leafy green, this is the recipe you are going to want to follow. Now that we've talked veggies, let's talk the meat. Pork is going to be the most traditional option for any Chinese dumpling. Ground pork is basically all that we grew up eating in dumplings, but you could use chicken in this recipe. I would just say use dark meat ground chicken. It can be kind of tough to find ground chicken that's dark meat rather than breast meat. The best way to ensure that you're using dark meat ground chicken is to actually grind it yourself. We have a hand chopping method that takes just minutes. All you need is a knife and a cutting board, and you buy boneless, skinless chicken thighs and you hand chop them yourself. And actually, if you hand chop your meat, the texture of the dumpling is gonna be all the better for it. And we will link that video right here. So the last thing I'm gonna talk about before we get into this recipe is the mixing method. So we normally, for as long as I can remember, my mom has hand mixed the dumpling filling in a regular large mixing bowl with a pair of chopsticks. Basically, she just kind of would like hold the chopsticks like a wooden spoon and just like mix in one direction really for quite a long time, like maybe 10 minutes. You want the filling to be super pasty and emulsified so that the filling is very sort of cohesive and homogeneous. I actually, some years ago was like, hey, why are we doing this by hand when we could be using a stand mixer? If you have one of these, I say use it. We use the paddle attachment and it just makes it a lot quicker and you don't have to sort of like mix so long by hand because yeah, you know, it takes some elbow grease, and especially if you have little kids or you're, you know, super busy, the mixer's just a lot easier. So now we're gonna make the filling. I'm gonna show you how to mix it by hand. While I prefer to do it in the stand mixer, my mom always makes it by hand. My sister still mixes it by hand. So, and if you don't have a stand mixer, this is how to do it. The first step in this recipe is to blanch the leafy greens. So let's go to the wok. I have a wok full of boiling water here. You do not need to use a wok. You can use any large pot. And I'm just gonna drop these veggies in. So these were thoroughly washed before I started cooking them. You just sort of put them in a large basin of water. I separated the leaves of the bok choy so that it makes it easier to wash them. And now I'm just gonna blanch them for a couple of minutes until they're really tender, because then I'm going to chop them super, super small. So I want them to be nice and tender. It's been about 2 minutes and these are about done. So I'm gonna turn it off and I'm gonna drain them. So I'm just gonna scoop it with a strainer into a colander. And this is just gonna sort of like take down like the bulk of the vegetable. It's gonna allow us to squeeze out excess liquid as well so that the dumplings don't end up too wet. So if you were to just chop raw vegetables and then put them in certain raw vegetables like these leafy greens, you would end up with a really waterlogged filling that would sort of like fall apart when you eat the dumpling, which we don't want. Now it's time to squeeze out this liquid. I'm just gonna rinse them with cold water because they're still pretty hot, and I'm gonna wanna like squeeze these, so I don't wanna squeeze hot vegetables, so I'm just gonna rinse it in cold water.
What are your thoughts on ice bath?
It just seems like an unnecessary step to me when you could just go like this and it cools them right. Oh. We don't need an ice bath. We don't need to wash another or rinse another bowl or take out another bowl. This is fine. So you can see post blanching, the vegetable is a lot more pliable and soft. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna squeeze all of the water out with my hands, and then we're gonna chop them.
You don't really need like a towel or anything. No. No special equipment necessary.
Before we start making the filling, let's talk about the seasonings. We only have a few basic ingredients here. We have oil and salt. Everybody's got oil and salt. And then we have these 4 things that you need. So these are all part of our 10 essential Chinese pantry items: soy sauce, Shaoxing wine, sesame oil, white pepper. If you've been cooking with us for a while, you already have these. The salt gives it a nice umami. The wine gives it a nice sort of complex flavor. The sesame oil is really nutty and rounds out that taste. And then the white pepper, you're gonna see white pepper in Chinese recipes more so than black pepper. It's just gonna give a nice, it's so subtle, you don't even know it's there, but it's an important ingredient. So now we're gonna chop the vegetables. I'm gonna do it a little bit at a time. So I just sort of grab like a tennis ball sized amount, and I'm just sort of gonna bunch it up in a roll or as tightly as I can. And then I have a cleaver here. You could also use a regular, whatever knife you have, but a larger chef's knife would be better. And I'm just gonna really finely chop. These stems are very thick, so I'm gonna have to sort of run the knife through it several times. If you were using shepherd's purse or spinach, this would be easier because the stems aren't as large in those. So it would just be a matter of basically chopping the leaves and very thin stems, which is easier. Baby bok choy is a little bit more labor intensive. So this is about the texture that you want. So you may be wondering why we would squeeze the water out of the vegetables when we're just gonna add water back to the filling later. The reason for that is that you want to control the amount of liquid that is in your filling. And if you don't squeeze that water out, you're gonna get variable amounts of liquid in there, and the filling could be too wet, could be too dry. So as you watch me chop this, you may be thinking, that looks annoying. Can I use my food processor? And the answer is yes, with a few caveats. You wanna make sure that you are not pureeing the vegetable. In order to do that, I would pulse it and pulse it in small batches. If you put too much of this vegetable in there at once, you're gonna end up sort of having to go pretty far with the food processor to get it all chopped, and then you might end up with a little bit of, like, some of it a little bit too pureed. You know what? I am kind of tired of chopping. I'm gonna put this in the bowl and let's try the food processor method. I'm gonna do this in batches so that I can make sure that everything is chopped evenly. I don't wanna add too much to the food processor. All right, and now I'm going to pulse it. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there because a bunch of stuff is getting stuck. So I just need to use a spatula to scrape down the sides, and you're gonna wanna stop it periodically to do that. Okay, it's pretty good. As you can see, the vegetables are nice and chopped, small, but not pureed. Okay, I just finished my last batch of veggies, and I will admit I'm probably never gonna hand chop again because that was really a lot easier. So as you can see, it definitely is more sort of like, it's chopped. Maybe I went a little too far with it, but it's fine. We don't have to be too precious about it. As long as you haven't pureed it. And if you chop your vegetables and you find that there's any water pooling around them, you need to squeeze them again. This is actually fine. I don't see any water, but if you do see some water pooling, remove that water, squeeze the vegetables again, because you're gonna wanna be able to control the amount of liquid that you put into the filling. Okay, so I'm gonna add the ground pork, and then I'm gonna add the seasoning ingredients. So I'm gonna add the Shaoxing wine, the soy sauce. So this is the soy sauce, and then sesame oil. Okay, so here's the salt. And then I'm gonna just eyeball the white pepper. And my last ingredient is oil. You may be wondering why we add oil to a filling that is ground pork. Doesn't ground pork have fat in it? Yes, it does, but the oil is going to make sure that your filling is really nice and moist. The way my mom put it to me was, would you make a salad or cook a vegetable without oil? This is the same concept. We're gonna use 2/3 of a cup, which sounds like a lot, but if spread across several dozen dumplings, it's really not. If you don't add the oil, you're gonna end up with kind of a dry filling. Okay, so I'm just gonna start, I'm actually just gonna break up the meat. Okay. The goal with mixing is to get the filling to be very homogeneous, almost like a paste, because you want the filling to be like that homogeneous when you're eating the dumpling, right? You want it to be all together and not sort of like lumpy or separated. Like, you want the vegetables and the meat to be really well incorporated. Well, okay, so I guess I've chosen this direction. The other thing about mixing is that my mom always said you have to mix in one direction. She never gave me a really like satisfactory explanation as to why, but I'm going to do that. I've chosen counterclockwise, so that is what I'm gonna do. Okay, so we're mixing. Mixing by hand, it does take some work. You're gonna be standing here mixing for about 6 to 8 minutes, and we're gonna show you what the filling is supposed to look like at the end. The other ingredient that we have to add is water. Okay, so now that the filling is somewhat incorporated, I'm going to add the water. So I'm just gonna gradually add the water. I'll add about 1/3 of it. I'm just gonna mix it. The reason we are adding water here is the dumpling is gonna turn out much juicier. So when you bite into like a delicious dumpling at a Chinese restaurant and the dumpling just like oozes the juice, that's because there was water or some other liquid added to the filling. If you've ever made dumplings at home on your own and you thought, this is really dry, that's the reason. It's a lack of oil and a lack of water. Another tip when adding the water is to add it gradually because you might not need all of it. Depending on the type of vegetable you're using, some have a little bit more moisture than others. For example, shepherd's purse, the leaf is very, very thin and you can squeeze a lot more of the liquid out of those vegetables than you can with bok choy, which has like a much thicker stem. That's like sort of acting like a sponge for water. So that's why there might be a little bit of variation there. If you're wondering how soup dumplings are made, how they get all of that soup into the dumpling, it's actually aspic that's added, which is a meat jelly, which is added to the filling. And the jelly stays solid when the filling is raw. And then as the dumpling cooks, it melts, and then that's how you get the soup in your dumpling. Add a little bit more. Can you come look at this filling, Ma?
You just have to keep it going, get it sticky.
But there's enough water.
Yes.
Okay.
I think a lot of times if you use chopstick or something slightly with a bigger surface,
It's faster. A tip that my mom just reminded me of is that to make this process go a little bit faster, you can actually use 4 chopsticks. It's just a bigger mixing implement, so more meat is getting mixed. It's like way better. 4 chopsticks, 2 pairs, everybody. It's much better. If you don't have chopsticks, you could just mix this filling with forks or with a wooden spoon. That would work fine too. I'm supposed to go the other way. I started counterclockwise and then I mixed clockwise in that segment. Should we do it again?
No.
Okay. I think that that's like a fake rule. But
Okay, so is the filling done?
yeah. Well, I don't know. Ma has to look at it. Is this good?
it's pretty good. Pretty good.
Okay. Okay, it's ready. Let's assemble. So as you can see, the filling is really sort of like very moist and very homogeneous. Like everything is sort of all amalgamated together. There's no separateness to the vegetable and pork. It's all one mixture. Before we go to making all of these dumplings, a good tip is to test your filling flavor by making a few dumplings. So you can make one just for yourself to taste, or you can make a few if you want other members of your family to taste them as well and give their input. And then after we've tasted those, we're going to adjust the seasoning. You might need a little bit more salt. You might need a little bit more Shaoxing wine. You could also just follow our recipe to a T and it would be fine. But if you want to really refine your dumpling filling to your tastes, make a few test dumplings and adjust the seasoning. Okay, so now I'm going to show you 3 ways to fold a dumpling. So I'll start with the easiest method. With any of these methods, you want to make sure that you add water around the edge of the dumpling wrapper. Dumpling wrappers are round. Don't buy the square ones. Those are for wontons. So I'm going to add the filling to the center. A little, like about a tablespoon of filling. And this method is literally fold in half like a pierogi, and that's it. This is like if you're like novice, you're just starting out, you haven't quite built up that confidence yet, you just want to make some dumplings, you could just fold it in half and just sort of like rest it like that. This is in fact how a lot of frozen dumplings are made. The factory machinery will just sort of like fold them in half and that's it. This is perfectly fine if you want to stay in your comfort zone.
They use a lot of filling. So you go like this. You close it, close it, and then you put your hand here like this, and then you go like this. Okay, and then you kind of like just like press a little bit so the bulk comes to the bottom like that, and that's it.
For the second method, you only have to make 2 pleats. So I'll show you that one. So I'm just gonna wet the outside again. I'm gonna add the filling to the center, slightly too much. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to seal it at the top, and then I'm gonna make 2 pleats. So I just fold it from here to here. That's 1. And then I'm gonna seal to the end here. And then I do the exact same thing on the other side. I just fold it like that. And you may need a little bit of extra water just to seal these like little flaps. And that's it. That's method 2. Just 2 simple folds, and you have a slightly prettier dumpling with more of a dumpling shape. So now I'll go for the third method. The water here is what's gonna keep the dumpling sealed. Make sure that when you put the filling on the dumpling that you're keeping it in the center. You don't want the grease from the filling to get anywhere over here, or otherwise the dumpling will fall apart. So here we go. This is the most advanced method. This is the method that we grew up with. So you start at one end, you pinch this closed, and then you just pleat it like a fan as you go across. You just make a series of pleats, and you could do it with two hands. You don't have to be fancy and try to do it with... If you're unsure about it, just like put the dumpling down. You don't have to hold it in your hands. Put it down so you can kind of concentrate on what you're doing with the folding. And then I just like squeeze to make sure that the dumpling is really well sealed. And that's it. That is the third, slightly more advanced method. Just with a little practice, you'll get it. Okay, so I'll show you again. Put the filling in the center. And then I'm just going to pinch from one end, it doesn't matter which end, and then start pleating. Just in pleats all in a row. If you need to, if the filling's starting to come out on one end, you just take your finger and push it back inside and then seal it. And then if you see here that the pleats are sort of not sealed, you just take a little bit of water, put it behind those pleats, and stick them to the rest of the dumpling so that it's nice and sealed. Make sure you pinch it tight. You don't want those dumplings to open up while they're cooking. Bonus method, which is a variation on that third one, is to pleat from both ends. So I'll show you what I mean. So like the first method, you just pinch in the center, and then you're gonna pleat from both sides. So it's usually like 3 on each side. And then again, make sure that your dumpling is really nice and sealed. And there you go. Okay, so I'm going to taste our test dumplings. I just boiled them in water. I think they're perfect. Sometimes my mom will add a little bit more Shaoxing wine to this. Maybe sometimes it's a little more sesame oil, sometimes it's a little bit more white pepper. In this case, I think that they're perfect. I wouldn't change anything. If you are tasting your dumpling and think that it's not salted enough, just remember, if you're using some kind of dumpling sauce or you're dipping your dumplings in soy sauce, there's gonna be salt, additional seasoning there. So you don't necessarily wanna over salt your dumpling. That's just a tip to keep in mind. So now that we know that our filling is good, we are just going to keep assembling the rest. So once you've assembled your entire pan of dumplings, you can either cook them or you can freeze them. In order to freeze them, we just place them on a parchment-lined baking sheet. We keep them slightly separated. You don't want them to stick together. We cover them, so you could use plastic wrap. We actually just use clean grocery bags. We like put one over one end and another over the other end and just put them in our chest freezer. Once they are frozen solid, which takes around like 8 hours to overnight, the next day you can just pull them out of the freezer, transfer them off this baking sheet into like freezer bags, and then store them in the freezer that way. They'll keep at best quality for about 3 months. You really want to eat them within that 3-month period. They will taste the best. If they're a little bit older than that, you can still eat them. They're just not going to taste quite as fresh. Okay, so now it's time to cook the dumplings. I'm going to show you how to pan fry them and also how to boil them. You can also steam them. We'll give the details, the link in the description box below on our 3 cooking methods if you want to look into the steaming. Today, I'm going to boil and pan fry. So I'm just going to place the dumplings into this pan. So we have a hot pan of oil here. You just hear sort of a light sizzle. That's good. You don't want them to like really be, you don't want the pan to be so hot that they like turn brown on contact. And the pan frying method is kind of, it's more of like a steam fry. Like you are gonna create steam here to cook the dumplings, but you also have this oil. With the pan frying method, once you've seen the bottom of the dumplings get a little bit sort of starting to get golden, that's when you're gonna add the water. This is not quite there yet. So once you have this golden brown bottom, on the dumplings, you're going to add the water. So I'm gonna pour and I'm gonna hold, because you're gonna get some splatter, I'm gonna hold the lid as like a shield. And you just wanna cover the bottom layer of the pan with water. Cover it, and you're gonna let it steam over medium heat until all of the water has evaporated. So you know that the pan-fried dumplings are done when the bottoms are nice and golden and crispy and there's no more water in the pan. So to boil, it's actually much simpler. So I just have a pot of boiling water here. I'm just gonna drop the dumplings and I'm gonna boil them for about 7 minutes. You're gonna see them float to the top. Once they've floated to the top, cook them for another minute or two and they're done. It's actually not quite enough water, but we're gonna work with it, it's fine. So once the dumplings have been dropped, you wanna kinda keep the water moving so that they don't stick to the bottom of the pot like this. Hopefully that one releases in a second. But that's why you shouldn't be lazy and you should boil more water than I did. Okay, 7 minutes. Okay, so these dumplings are done. I'm going to scoop them out with a slotted spoon. Boiled dumplings, when you're using store-bought dumpling wrappers, aren't quite as pretty. If you make your own dumpling dough, boiling really shines. It's one of my favorite ways to cook them. I really like boiled dumplings. As you can see, they're not quite as pretty as the pan-fried dumplings are gonna be, but when you make your own dumpling dough, that's when the boiling method really shines, because the texture of homemade dough boiled is just really, really delicious. If you like a crispy texture, go with the pan-fried. If you like this sort of like slippery texture, go with the boiled, or make both for a little bit of variety. The Walks of Life is your one-stop shop for all your dumpling needs. True. So I'm just gonna start it. It's not plugged in. Oh. You're pooping so much. You're pooping so much, baby. Oh, oh.
Hi, fish.
You wanna wave?
Wait.